Well, with me now for more on Xi's visit to Europe is Maria Adele Carrai, a China expert and political scientist. She's a senior researcher with the Leuven Centre for Global Governance in Belgium and is currently working from New York. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
So as we heard there, more than a dozen deals were signed spanning energy, food, transport and others. So overall, just how valuable is this relationship to both countries in terms of trade and investment?
You mean European Union and China?
France and China.
France and China. Well, France is one of the main recipients of foreign direct investments from China, although there's been a drop in the past years. And they do a lot of business, and this deal was worth over 30 billion euro, the agreement that they signed, especially with Airbus. And they reflect European Union-China relations that is a very long and enduring one. And China is EU's second largest trading partner, and the EU is China's biggest trading nation. And there's been a lot of investments in the past years, so that they skyrocketed in 2016.
And speaking of those interests, we know that China and France have cooperated on traditional industries like nuclear, aviation and automobiles, but then they also balance it with more progressive sectors like their collaborations on the environment. How do you see this economic relationship evolving?
Yeah, so there is a lot of interest, especially now that the US has dropped out from the Paris Agreement. China has been a real good partner for developing new standards for environment and sustainable development.
And as we look at some of the other geopolitical issues going on in the world, we did see that bilateral trade reached a record high, surpassing $60 billion last year between China and France. And China's Ministry of Commerce says that French exports of agricultural products, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and luxury clothing really saw some rapid growth. But how did they do that against this backdrop of rising trade disputes?
Yeah, so I think actually it's something that is positive, the rise in trade dispute between US and China. And it has created a lot of volatility, and China is looking for new partners, and European Union market is very palatable for China. And the last China-EU summit that took place last summer was very fruitful, and they finally managed to sign a common statement, a joint statement that didn't happen for the past 3 years. So there is a lot of cooperation going on precisely because of the volatility of the international situation that was created by China-US trade war.
Now, as we know, France is obviously very popular for its wine and spirits, but consumption for French wine and spirits actually dropped. Why is that?
Well, I hope it's because of Italy. Now Italy has also signed a new memorandum of understanding, and hopefully it will be able to export more of its food and beverage to China. But I think overall there's been a tightening also for corruption campaign, the anti-corruption campaign in China, and I think part of the corruption scheme was to invite guests to very expensive dinners and give very expensive wine bottles as gifts. And so I think the drop of wines sales, French wine sales in China has to do partly with the anti-corruption campaign started by Xi Jinping.
Now, let's also talk about the Airbus deal. We saw that China agreed to buy 300 Airbus planes. Now, it already has an existing plant in Tianjin and also an innovation center in Shenzhen. But given the current environment with its rival Boeing, given the MAX jet crashes and the ongoing investigations, what are your thoughts on this deal and the market for Airbus?
Well, the Airbus, the last Airbus was a bit of a failure, and so that's why the Boeing took over. And this, I think, might be a good possibility for Airbus to regain a big share of the market against Boeing.
And what would you say are the major differences between the two economies that could pose potential challenges for bilateral ties?
The main challenges, sorry?
Yes, the main challenges between the two economies that you think might potentially cause some friction.
Well, I think because France has to do with the European Union, so I think they have to create synergy with the European Union, and that might partly slow down the Chinese investment, especially with the now screening mechanism that they're trying to develop. And but other than that, I think that there's a lot of potential for cooperation between France and China, and the European Union and China. I think this the visit of Xi Jinping in Europe is really a chance to redefine the strategy of the EU toward China and attract more investments that follows like more rules, like higher rules and regulations.
Maria Adele Carrai, thank you so much. Senior researcher with the Leuven Centre for Global Governments.